As parts of the world begin to loosen up stay-at-home restrictions and society acclimates themselves to a new normal, we are still in search of a vaccine for COVID-19, which experts are expeditiously working on, but there is no clear timetable as to when it will be ready. To date, there have been over 5.4 million worldwide cases, and America leads the way with over 1.6 million. Frontline workers are still putting their lives at risk to help those battling with this ferocious virus. One of the fearless frontline workers is my best friend, Shivani. She is a respiratory therapist at a hospital in the Greater Toronto Area, working with her colleagues around the clock to beat this pandemic. She takes us through a day in her world. Hey Shiv, thanks for joining us on another episode of Passion Projects. As you know, Canada has had over 84,000 cases of COVID-19. How are you coping?
How am I doing? That's a loaded question. I'd say that I'm doing well, given the circumstances. I think we've all had a really big shift in our lives and our lifestyle, and have had to employ different coping mechanisms and that sort of thing. So I would say in the grand scheme of things, I'm doing well, but it hasn't been an easy road, as I'm sure a lot of people will have the same sentiment,
Right, which is good to understand, because when you talk about it being such a disturbing time right now, I mean, how do you find that? Do you have any of such coping mechanisms that you use to kind of soothe you after a long day at work?
I think, there's, like I said, there's been a whole big shift in my lifestyle. Like I've had to kind of change my entire lifestyle into something quite differently just because of the pandemic and what was kind of required of us at the hospital. So I was, put into a lot of situations that I feel that at the time, maybe I felt like, oh man, overwhelmed and I wasn't prepared for. But now as time has gone on, it's kind of become something I'm a little bit more comfortable with. And I think the biggest thing that has helped me throughout this whole pandemic and coping and that sort of thing, one is an amazing support system, such as my best friend, Pyle, and others, and my family, and having the ability to video chat with everybody and be able to just kind of see my loved ones has been a really big thing that's helped. And the other thing I think that has worked well for me, which I don't know is very tangible, but is reflection. So like after I come back from the hospital, I strip down, throw my clothes in like a basket that goes straight into the washer, and then I go into the shower. And that shower, allows me to kind of rethink happenings of the day and what happened and kind of making sense of it, and truly finding a way to find the most positive out of what is going on, because if we just focus on the negative, it can be a really big black hole,
Definitely. That being said, can you walk me through what a day in the life of someone on the front lines is like at a hospital for you in the Greater Toronto Area?
So first of all, like you said, I don't know if you said it, but I'm a respiratory therapist, right? So on the front lines, we are the ones that are responsible for a lot of what is going on in the intensive care unit regarding the ventilators and things like that, which I'm sure everybody's heard of. But your day starts out by coming into the hospital. We have to line up outside because they have closed down majority of the entrances to the hospital. We only have two entrances that we can go through now. One is a staff entrance and one is a patient entrance. Mm-hmm. So we are only allowed to go through the staff entrance. So you can imagine 8:00 in the morning when everyone's trying to get in, right? There's a big lineup. So you got to wait. We're distanced by 6 feet, 2 meters, just like we're supposed to. Mm-hmm. You walk in. First thing you do is you wash your hands because there is a hand sanitizer pump. Then you approach the screening station where they ask you a bunch of questions such as, do you have cough, fever, shortness of breath, contact with anybody with COVID, all that sort of stuff. If your answer is no, then you proceed to wash your hands again and you have to scan your badge. After you scan your badge, you walk up to somebody who gives you a mask, and that's a mask that you wear for the entire day. We all know about PPE conservation and all that. So, that mask technically until it's soiled is yours for the day. So you have to make sure you take good care of it. So after that, you go upstairs, we go to our unit, we get the report from what happened the night before with the RTs, what went on with the patients, things that we might need to check up on or what we might need to manage our patients better. And then you start off your rounds for the day. So you go around, you see your patients, and you make sure everybody's doing well. If you're in the intensive care unit, you're looking at things like ventilator settings. You're looking at how your patient is doing. You're looking at if what you've set for their ventilator settings are appropriate for them, or, would they require more or less. Working with the nurses that are in the unit, as well as working with the intensive care doctors that are there. And so that's kind of what your day-to-day routine would look like. Now, throw into that code blues, cardiac arrests, patients, not doing well, people coming through the emerge, traumas, and all the while, this is basically what an RT would do, but all the while now being afraid that every single person that could come through that door could be COVID positive, right?
Right.
And in the intensive care unit, we know. So we know which patients are COVID positive because they go for swabs, but that doesn't mean that we, like the rest of the population or society, get to distance ourselves or socially distance ourselves.
Definitely, of course.
We have to go into that room fully geared up, mask, shield, gown, boot covers, head covers, everything. You go in, you treat the patient because they're your priority, and then you take off all of that in that room because you can't walk outside with all that on, because if you do, then you're contaminating. So then you take it all off and you wash your hands and you leave the room, and you hope that what you put on and all precautions you took will keep you from contracting the virus. That's like, a long-winded or a snippet or whatever, into what we are kind of seeing.
It definitely does. And it seems like it's such a process to go through on a daily basis. And that definitely does affect your mental health as well. How do you find yourself coping when you're in these circumstances throughout the day?
At first, it was really hard, just because of the fact that you are seeing something that is making people so sick. Like, we've all worked in the hospital before. We've seen patients get sick. We've seen them go on ventilators. This is not something, that's unique to COVID, for example, right? Mm-hmm. But when you're seeing kind of like patients on patients coming in with the same symptoms that end up taking the same kind of trajectory of becoming sick and how quickly they become sick, it's really hard because you start thinking to yourself, well, hey, from all the research and everything that I've learned and read on TV from what we've been, gotten from doctors or, China, or all the information that's coming out at the beginning was like, well, everyone's old. And if you're old, then, that's when it's going to hit you hard. But then when you start seeing people coming in like 40s, 50s, 60s, people that are your parents' same age, and you start seeing them going down that path, and kind of where it's going because you've seen a few that way, it's tough. And I think for me, the thing that I find that helps me cope with it is that we are trying our absolute best. We have a great team that we work with, all the doctors, the nurses, the RTs, everybody, we all really support each other. And on top of that, like, I think for me, a coping mechanism for that, and I could be wrong or right, or I don't know, is education. So like when I start getting worried about my parents and, you know, them getting sick, I'll come home and I'll start telling them stories of things that I might have seen, just to kind of hammer it in their head, because I'd rather my parents be annoyed, upset with me that I'm nagging them than end up in the situations that I'm seeing other people in. We always have to look at positive, right? Like, what's positive out of this? Positive is that people are getting better. The positive is that people do end up leaving the intensive care unit. The positive is that we do see people recovering from this. So that's the positive. But sometimes you just have to call a spade and vent and be like, this is really crappy. And this is really hard. And you might need to just scream or yell or whatever it might be, just to kind of get that emotion out. Because it's important to get those emotions out. Because if you don't get those emotions out, then you might see something another day and it might just make you kind of snap. And that's not what we need right now with healthcare, is the workers, you know, getting sick or having issues with their mental status because it's just too much or overwhelming.
I completely agree. And I feel like, I mean, here I am having these moments at home where I get so cooped up at home that I feel like yelling, and I feel like just, you know, doing something that just will make me, you know, ease my mind. But at the same time, I think about it too. And I'm like, there are these frontline workers like you who are actually going through this and who have to witness things that they don't want to. And I commend you for that. And I appreciate it. And I thank you because it is very difficult to go through. And I think that now we're seeing, you know, here in America, them talking about opening up the country and in different stages. But I don't know if America is ready for that. And I just feel as though there is so much that us on the outside might not know about you and your colleagues and what they're going through. That being said, is there anything more you can do to kind of shed light on what we may be missing out on?
Short answer, yes. Long answer, yes. I mean, I think I've had this conversation with many people, whether it be healthcare workers, non-healthcare workers, colleagues, parents, friends, we've had this conversation, that when you are not seeing something actually in front of you, like how we as healthcare workers and frontline workers are seeing it, it is very easy to kind of not disregard it, but it's very easy to forget about it, right? Yeah. And that's no fault of anybody's. I am not blaming anybody for that or anything. It's just the circumstances, right? Like, if you hear about the wildfires in Australia, you're going to feel bad. But if you are fighting the wildfires in Australia, like firefighters, you are going to know how important it is to maybe not have campfires outside or something like that. So when you're face to face with something, it's very easy to understand it. When you're not face to face with it, it's a very different situation, especially when that situation is forcing you to basically stay at home, not go out, don't go to restaurants, basically not socialize or see anybody, right? So it's very easy for us to convince ourselves that everything's okay now, everything's fine, it's time to open up, we're going a little stir crazy, it's time for everybody to start, opening up, or, everyone start living their lives again. And I understand that. I mean, I'm in the same situation too. I don't have a life. right now.
Yeah.
I only go to work. I don't see my family. I don't see my friends. I don't see anybody. I know what that's like. Going to work is not going out and having fun and socializing, right?
Exactly.
So I get it. I understand how frustrating it is. However, if everybody, or just people in general, had to spend a day, possibly in the intensive care unit or whatever it was, and instead of being told social isolate, don't go outside, don't do this, they basically said to them, here is what you're going to wear, and you're going into that room and that person has COVID. And you don't have a choice. You don't have a choice if you can go into that room or not, right? If everybody had to go through that, maybe even once, they would understand that staying at home is not you losing your liberties. It is not you losing your rights. It is not you being confined and ordered to basically follow, orders or whatever it is. It is to keep you safe. It is to keep you so you don't end up contracting this horrendous virus. What I would say to people is, I understand. I get it. I understand. This is not in a million years. I'm not a million, but maybe in my 30 years, my 30 years of living, I don't think I ever would have even fathomed or imagined something like this, where I'm in a situation where, number one, I'm living on my own, right? Because I'm social distancing, not only from my family, but also from my significant other, because I don't want to get him sick. I'm going to work that basically feels like every day I'm going into war, like a battlefield, Yeah. I don't have a choice. I don't have the choice of basically staying at home and social distancing and telling my employer, hey, listen, sorry, I don't feel comfortable coming to work because I'm scared I'm going to get COVID. I don't have that option. Not just me, healthcare. I'm talking in general, healthcare.
Definitely. Of course.
We don't have that option even. So to even have the option to work from home and say, hey guys, I'm worried about coming into work today because I'm scared of this crazy virus and I don't want to, expose myself or my family to it. I almost feel like that's a privilege or a luxury. And I mean, maybe people might disagree with me and they'll get all upset with me and say like, no, it's terrible staying at home. But from our perspective, from a healthcare perspective, it feels like a luxury or a privilege. Like we go to work and we have FOMO, or like we have this feeling of like, man, I wish I could work from home. And so obviously, one, that's been hard. And the other thing I would probably like to tell people, and I had this conversation with my parents too, and once I started having it with my mom or talking to my mom about it, it kind of had this, when you have these kind of light bulb moments or like aha moments.
Yep, definitely.
Yeah. So it was like, okay, so we start opening things up, right? Now in the GTA, which is a bit different than what happened in America with, New York, LA, we have been very fortunate that we haven't seen this crazy influx of patients where we can't manage them. Does that make sense?
That does.
So we haven't gotten to the point where our emergency rooms are so packed that we have to put people in the hallways, or, we have to put patients that are on ventilators side by side. We haven't had that happen yet in the GTA, from what I know, right? From my experience. Mm-hmm. Not saying it hasn't happened in other places, but from my hospital, right? Even though it's been tough because we've had an influx of patients, not like an over, whatever you want to call it, a patient, but an influx of patients, it has put a lot of pressure on healthcare staff. They've had to increase the amount of healthcare staff that works, right? So now you have more people working. If you have more people working, less people get time off because you guys can't all be off at the same time, all that sort of stuff, right? The thing is that the numbers are coming down, and I think that that's great and it's fantastic. But our worry as frontline workers, and I'm pretty sure I share the same sentiment as a lot of my colleagues, is that if we open up, which is great, fine, we need to do this. But if we open up too early and we start seeing COVID patients come through again, okay, fine, they'll keep coming. But the problem is when there's too many COVID patients to manage, or patients in general.
It's like that second wave that you don't really want to anticipate, but if opening up could result into that.
Yeah. And I mean, a second wave is okay if there are patients trickling in, like what we've had, where like we see a steady amount of COVID patients, which is also still really bad because people are getting sick, but it's a flow that we can manage. The way I was trying to explain it to my mom was like, okay, so we have 200 people today walking around with COVID. We know for a fact that there's 200 people walking around with COVID, right?
Yeah.
We knew yesterday there was 300 people walking around with COVID. Now, just because today's numbers were 200 doesn't mean yesterday's numbers just disappear, right?
Exactly.
So now add those. We actually have 500 people walking around with COVID.
Right.
Now you take the day before that and you had 400 that day. Now we have 900 people walking around with COVID.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what we know is that it's not like you get COVID one day and tomorrow you're cured.
Yeah.
Right? If it is in your system, as they say, for 2 to 14 days, and you can shed that virus for 2 to 14 days, right? Now add up all the cases that we've had maybe in the last 2 weeks. What are we looking at? We're looking at almost over a couple of thousand.
Definitely.
Right?
Yes.
What is it that we are not able to see? And I get it. People will say, well, I wear a mask and I wear gloves and I wear this and I wear that. Right?
Yeah.
But are you telling me that somebody who goes grocery shopping at one point or other didn't try to adjust their mask, didn't touch their nose by accident, didn't touch their nose with their gloves and then not wash their gloves and ended up touching an apple? Are you telling me that with 100% certainty that that's not going to happen?
Right.
So, okay, you want to open up. I get it. But then we've got to be prepared for what's coming our way.
Yes.
So when you wear a mask, you're not wearing it so that when you go out, you're protecting yourself from the world. No, it's the other way around. When you wear a mask, you are protecting the world from you. So all these people who are walking around that are not wearing masks, that are like, well, I'm not scared, whatever, doesn't matter if you're not scared. We are scared of you because you are not wearing a mask.
And don't get me wrong, that drives me crazy. And I know we've had this discussion where the proper precautions aren't being taken by everyone.
I had a conversation with one of my friends, and she's a doctor. She's a respirologist. And she brought up a really interesting point. And that is that in healthcare, whether it be doctors, nurses, RTs, physios, everybody, whoever's in healthcare, we tend to not be very, we're not alarmists. We're like, we are understanding that germs are everywhere. We deal with germs. You build immunity to them. It is what it is, right? Like, I remember how many times my mom would be like, Shivani, you went outside and you didn't wash your hands when you came in the house. This is before COVID.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, whatever. It'll build immunity, right? Like, it's, it's that whole thing about let your kids play in the mud because it helps them to build immunity, right? Don't make everything too clean.
Right.
And a lot of people in healthcare are the same way because we're not scared of germs. We deal with them on a daily basis, right? I'm a respiratory therapist. I've had people cough all over me before, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's just part of the job. If people in healthcare, doctors, frontline workers, nurses, if we sound like we are freaking out or alarmed, or we actually, like, we keep talking about how this thing is no joke, that should really resonate with people. Because if we are freaking out about it, then there's a problem. We are freaking out about this virus. One, because it's ferocious too. We are seeing what it's doing to people inside of their bodies. And it's not like, okay, you have cough, fever, shortness of breath, you have COVID. No, you could have an eye infection and you could have COVID.
Mm-hmm.
You could have a stroke and you could have been COVID positive. You could have diarrhea and be COVID positive. You could have just a runny nose and you could be COVID positive. So there is nothing that we have that basically is an indicator to be like, yep, if you have this, then you for sure have it. Or if you have this, you for sure have it. We don't know. There's no manual for what we're dealing with. And when you see people that are close to your age, or maybe, older siblings age, or you see people who, maybe are your parents' age in their 50s and 60s and came in with absolutely nothing Pyle, no comorbidities, nothing. And they end up staying on a ventilator for 25 days or something like that because their lungs are just that shot. It makes you think, what the heck are we dealing with?
It's like this monster of a virus that we are trying to figure out. But at this point in time, there is no vaccine out there. Mm-hmm. What would it look like if and when we get this vaccine? Would it be safe to go outside, to go back into a work environment? Or are we going to be living this new normal?
I hope not.
No?
I can't. And, if you also read the literature and stuff, even if we do get a vaccine, it's not like a vaccine will start working immediately, right? Like, this is something that will take time. It will definitely take time, I don't think people understand that this is not just this transient thing that's going to disappear in a month or 2 or 3. I think people need to understand that what we are dealing with is something that I have a feeling we're going to have to deal with going forward. Like, I'm pretty sure, I was talking to my RT friends, like, I'm pretty sure 5, 6, 10 years down the road, we're going to still be dealing with COVID patients, but we'll have a better way to manage them.
Life is turned upside down in a matter of months.
We all have our own battles going on. Frontline workers will tell you their battle. Small business owners will tell you their battle. Other people that have other jobs will tell you their battle.
Yeah.
We all have a battle right now. It doesn't mean that one person's battle is more serious than the other. You know what I mean? We're all going through something. Everybody is being impacted, for sure. But if the numbers continue to go up, or we have a second wave, or whatever it is, the people that will be impacted 100% will be hospitals and healthcare workers. If things change and it starts getting nutty and it starts getting overwhelming, we won't be able to provide the same care for your loved ones that we can now. And that will directly impact people who are at home or not, going, that are staying home for work or whatever, yeah, maybe you're not on the front lines, but it might impact someone you love and care about. And why do we want to wait? Why do we want to wait till we get to the point where now we understand the severity of this virus because it has now impacted somebody we love and care about? Why do we want to wait till that point? Why do you need that wake-up call so late when we could prevent it from happening?
Does this put into perspective, in a way, why you kind of got into the healthcare profession? Or what was it for you that really motivated you to get into healthcare?
So I always knew I wanted to go into healthcare. So at the beginning, I think I dabbled with like doctor, then I dabbled with pharmacy, then I dabbled with physio, and I ended up settling on physio before I went in to do my undergraduate degree. Healthcare, well, science is always one thing that's interesting me, but the thing about healthcare, I think, and a lot of healthcare workers probably will say this to you, is that, there is a certain self-fulfillment / happiness, I would say, that comes from being able to provide service to others. And in healthcare, I feel like you are directly providing service to others because you're helping them if they are ill or whatever it is, right? My mom is also in healthcare. My mom's a lab technician. So, I obviously grew up seeing her also working with patients, dealing with patients and all that sort of stuff. But I knew that there was something about healthcare that was almost like a service to others that appealed to me. So physio, I did a co-op and I really enjoyed it. And I thought it was really interesting because it was all about rehabilitation. And it was all about, you come in broken and then you go through this period or this program and you come out not so broken anymore physically, right? Whether it be arms, legs, whatever. And also I used to be a gymnast, so I understand tearing tendons and breaking things and, pulled muscles and all that. I understand all that because I went through it. So I had a great deal of respect for physios because I understood that it was effective. And then I was in my last year of undergrad and I decided, okay, am I still going for physio? What am I going to do? And I don't know, I guess I came to kind of a crossroads in my life where I was like, I wouldn't mind physio, but I don't know, maybe it just felt like I had something else or another calling or whatever it was. And so I started talking to some friends about, what are some other healthcare jobs and things like that. And, nursing is one. And I looked into a bunch of other things, athletic therapy and different things. And then I came upon respiratory therapy, which was what one of my friends at MAC was doing. We called the Michener Institute for Respiratory Therapy. And so I researched it and I thought, hey, this is really interesting. It's all about breathing. It's all about, lungs. When you hear respiratory therapy, you think, oh, well, it's probably just pounding on the chest or some therapy for the lungs. So I did a job shadow and I actually realized that it's a lot more than that. You are dealing with people that are on their last breaths of life. You are dealing with people who are coming in that have, no vital signs. You are dealing with babies that are coming out of moms that are completely flat. You are dealing with trauma patients. You are dealing with patients whose lungs are not working enough, so they need to be put on a ventilator. You are working with patients that their bodies can't do what they need to do, so you might need to put a tube down their throat. You are dealing with all sorts of really critical issues. And you are right there. And you are responsible for basically helping the doctors and the nurses to keep this person alive. It is a huge responsibility. That person's family and friends are entrusting the healthcare system and their team to keep their loved one alive. And so that is your responsibility. Maybe this was a little bit more deeper than I thought, but hey, let's give it a shot. And so I applied for it and I got in and I went to the program and I graduated as a respiratory therapist. Felt fulfilled in the sense that I was doing something that was helping people, which was the reason I wanted to go into healthcare, was because I wanted to help people. But what was becoming very difficult for me emotionally and mentally was dealing with patients that were so close to end of life. I'm telling you about the great stories where, you get to see people come back and you're able to help them. But the other side of things that some healthcare professionals maybe talk about and some don't because it's so difficult is you see a lot of death.
Mm-hmm.
You see a lot of people die. You see a lot of people not make it. You see a lot of people succumb to their illness.
Mm-hmm.
And before all this COVID stuff happened, you see the family and you see what the families go through and you see how much of an impact it has on the families when they lose somebody that they love and they care about. That's a really hard thing. For me, like personally, I can't speak to others, but that's a really hard thing for me because I know they always tell you this, don't get emotionally attached. It's not good, but it's human. It's human to make comparisons. It's human to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and think about what they're feeling. I loved it, but I felt like I didn't want to be at the end anymore. I wanted to help people not end up in that position. What could I do to help people so they didn't maybe get that sick? And so I looked into some programs, and as a respiratory therapist, we also have the ability to go into education. And the education aspect of respiratory therapy is basically we work with a lot of chronic lung conditions. So chronic lung conditions are basically lung conditions that will be with you for the rest of your life. It's not like, oh, you get a cold and you get better, right? It's not like, oh, I had a fever today and you're better from your flu or your fever, right? This is something over time you've had damage to your lungs, or you have a condition that affects your lungs, and it's something that you're going to have to manage for the rest of your life. Two of the things that I would say that we deal with, there's many, but some of them are like patients who have asthma, or patients have COPD, which is like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, which is basically, deterioration to their lungs that could have been due to things like exposure to chemicals, asbestos, smoking, things like that. And unfortunately, there's damage to their lungs and it's not reversible, right? Mm-hmm. And you found, or doctors or research or studies found, that a lot of the people that end up in the hospital that have asthma or COPD are actually maybe ending up there because they maybe aren't taking their medications properly, or they're not understanding their illness or their condition and how to manage it so that they can actually manage it at home, so they don't end up having to come to the hospital, right? Yeah. So, and obviously if they come to the hospital has all sorts of bugs. So you're now exposing yourself to other bugs, right? Right. So the goal is can we manage it at home through medications or puffers or whatever it might be, so that you don't end up having to come to the hospital, because sometimes you might not need to go to the hospital. You might just need antibiotics, or you might need a, medication, or you might need puffers or whatever it might be. And so I've been doing that now, I'd say probably for 7 years or something, or 6 years or whatever. And it's a different aspect of healthcare than, being bedside and all that. Doing, like, it's not like the tangible material thing of like, I'm physically putting a tube in, or I'm physically doing this. But it's also very, very rewarding, because you are now not just you're not doing something for the patient, you are arming them with the knowledge that they need to take care of themselves. It's like, if you want to teach a man how to eat, you don't give him a fish, you give him a fishing hook and you teach him how to fish, right? You give him the tools he would need to survive, as opposed to just giving it to him on a silver platter. Don't give your patients just the medications. Teach them what they need. Teach them how it affects their condition. Teach them how it plays a role, so that when they do get into a bad situation, they're armed with the tools they need to help themselves. And that, for me, at this point in my life, is probably one of the most rewarding things I've done, because I am able to build a rapport with my patients, but also I'm able to see the fruits of their labor, Mm-hmm. They come back months later, oh my God, Shivani, like this, what you, recommended, or what you taught me, I got sick, I did this, I implemented the action plan that we decided, I didn't end up in the hospital, I didn't end up on heavy medications, I was able to manage it, and I'm feeling great now. I can't even put into words how rewarding that is. Because not only did we help the patient, we armed that patient with the knowledge they needed to help themselves. And patients, when they have the knowledge to help themselves, they are much more likely to be compliant with what the doctor is asking. And that's one of the biggest barriers in healthcare, is how do you get patients to adhere to the plan? Medications, puffers, exercise, whatever. How do you get them to adhere to that? And the way I feel, or I've noticed, is you arm them with the knowledge. Google is there for everybody. So people, if they don't understand, they'll Google everything. Yeah. Google is great, but sometimes Google will give you information that might not be accurate, credible, or peer reviewed, or whatever, right? So this way, you are giving them the knowledge. The knowledge you're giving them is sound and credible. And I would rather them take the knowledge from me than to one day just go and, Google something on their own. That's so fascinating. And that brings so much joy to my heart to hear how much you love what you do, and you got into it for all the right reasons. I thank you for that. And I appreciate that. Thanks, girl.
And I thank you for being on the front lines and going through these days where you don't know what you're going to expect. And just like you and so many others who are on the front lines, I appreciate that. And I know, I hope that the whole world does, because we are living in this new normal where we don't know what's next, but we appreciate everything that you do and continue to do.
If there's one last thought that I want to leave with people, is that be smart. We are all intelligent beings. We are all smart in our own way. There is a lot of information out there right now. Take the time, understand it, process it, make sense of it in your mind, in the sense like what makes sense with your gut, not what just everybody is talking about, not what's just popular, not just what is making headlines or whatever, really think it through. Take the time. We have only time right now. Take that time, process that information, and make it make sense for you.
No, you definitely made sense, and really provided us with more insight into what you as a frontline worker are dealing with and what precautions everyone else needs to take and be smart about. And we thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Pyle. And I'm going to leave you with quotes are always good.
Share them, please. We love them.
The quote is, "Just because I carry it well doesn't mean it's not heavy." People will walk around, smiles, happy, positive, everything, they look like they've got everything together. Doesn't mean they're not carrying a heavy load. Doesn't mean they don't have a lot of stuff going on. Doesn't mean that they don't have a ton of stress. Just because they are able to project and, show that positive side and are able to bring out the positive side doesn't mean they're not carrying a lot.
The risks have not diminished since reopening the country. Let's hope a second wave is not in the cards. Just know that if there is a second wave, we will have to return to our stay-at-home orders, and our brave and resilient frontline workers will continue to care for us. Thanks for joining me on another edition of Passion Projects. Feel free to share this episode and leave a comment, and subscribe if you haven't already on both iTunes and Spotify. Until next time, stay safe out there.